Hello and welcome to the continuation of part 2 of our section of assessment, specifically on the types of assessment and reporting. Here we're going to be looking at norm-referenced versus criterion-referenced results. Norm-referenced results are when we rate student performance in comparison to other students. Criterion-referenced results are where we rate student performance in comparison to intended learning outcomes. So those learning outcomes are generally part of the program of study or possibly subdivided by that teacher into an aspect of the outcomes in that program of study. The norm-referenced outcomes are the ones where the student progress is reported relative to others. Primary examples are grading on the curve, such as stay nines, where you've got a 1 through 9 scale. If you're familiar with the bell curve in Z-scores, it's really the Z-scores that we are reporting for the students. So it's heavily dependent on the performance of that student relative to their peer group. Now, if we look at grading and reporting assessment results as a means of helping students understand where they need to improve and where their strengths are, if that is our intended goal, the norm-referenced grading is the worst method of reporting student achievement that we have ever developed. It also virtually eliminates the ability to evaluate instructors. To use a couple of extreme examples, when my sister took a statistics course in her first semester of university, she went to the prof afterwards. We were on a stay 9 scale, where 1, 2, and 3 was a fail. A 7.5 average or above made the dean's honor roll. 9 was the highest possible grade. She had a 97% average in this course and got a 6 for her stay 9. So she went to the prof to find out how that could be, and it turns out so many students had 100% averages that they didn't give any 7s or 8s. Now, on a stay 9 scale, a 6 is not as impressive as a 97% average. On the flip side, when I was doing a third-year course, this is one that had been adjusted after a curriculum renewal committee was completely revamped. None of the members from the previous year served on it in the given year. There wasn't a lot of communication between the old group and the new, and essentially they took a course that should have been a full year and made it half a year. When I took that course, I had the second highest mark in the class. I got an 8 for the stay 9 because we had a class of about 12 students, and that second highest mark I got was a 35% average. The 35% was fair. The 8 I got was not representative of the learning that took place in that course. And in a third example, that indicates the big difficulty with evaluating instructors. When I was in that first year of my physics program, the fourth-year students were in a stellar interiors course. The prof that they had knew the material inside out, but was not a particularly effective teacher. The highest mark in their class was also in the 30s. It was a 32 or 33. The student who got that score got a 9. The next year, a new prof came in. He hadn't taught the course before. The old prof gave him this homework midterm final, all of which had been recovered in the previous year, so he could reuse them. None of the students in the previous year still had that material. But the new prof was a much more effective teacher, using exactly the same assessment instruments on that 9-point scale. A student with a 55 average ended up getting a 5 out of 9. Now, if I were an employer looking at those transcripts, I'd rather hire the student who got the 9 than the student who got the 5. But the student who got the 5 had an objectively measured greater understanding of the content. So marking things on the curve is about ranking students from best to worst, and not about reflecting how much they'd actually learned or how effective the instruction had been. And that's why it is still popular, because some people think, especially at the university level, that the goal of universities are to identify which students are the quote-unquote best students. Criterion-referenced reporting, on the other hand, is where each student is treated as an individual, and their performance is reported relative to the learning outcomes intended in the program of study. It gives a more accurate guide to student growth because we can tell the students, you are strong in this area, you are weak in that one. It can be translated into either percentage grades or skills checklists. So percentage grades are more common, but as we said in part 1, a 68% doesn't help you understand which 32% you need. Whereas a skills checklist can give you all the intended learner outcomes of the course and indicate these are the skills where you're strong, these are the skills where you need some support. So this wraps up part 2. Part 3, we'll take a look at reliability, validity, and bias in assessment items, which are 3 important measurements to see if the assessment item is actually doing the job it's intended to do. Parts 4 and 5 will break down norm-referenced and criterion-referenced reporting in much more detail. And then parts 6 through 9 will look at more detailed mathematical models that are used to evaluate these assessment items and determine which ones should and should not be used in future assessments. So please join us in the future as we move through the remaining lessons. Thank you for listening.